Hey Ken, good morning.
Hey Reed, how you doing?
Pretty well. Enjoying being back at work a little bit after a nice, good break and a very, very long weekend, which was really good. Did you do anything fun for Memorial Day weekend?
Well, Memorial Day is not really a thing for us up in Canada, right? So no, I can't say that we did anything that was
That's
super
fair enough.
special beyond we took a weekend, which is always a nice thing when you work. As a small business, we joke we only work on days that end in Y, so we try to take a couple off here and there where we can. So
I always forget because you're basically not even about just 2 hours north of me. But I almost think of like the Northwest really as its own little special bubble of people. Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland, in a sense.
yeah, well, it is. I mean, we have some different overlap, but there's definitely an international border in between there. So for what it's worth, I mean, I'm not allowed to
Yeah,
drive through it. Neither are you right now, right?
I know.
So
Yeah.
so there's that aspect, and yeah, holidays those can't clear customs. Just doesn't work that way. So
Like I heard in like 75 they used to allow them, but like at some point somebody passed some legislation so you couldn't import them anymore.
I don't know. I remember being down in Seattle once, and one of the servers at the Cheesecake Factory asked my wife. She goes, "Oh, are you celebrating President's Day?" And my wife kind of looked at her and said, "Well, no, I'm Canadian." And she goes, "Yeah." And he's like, "We don't have presidents, but you don't celebrate President's Day?" And we're like, "No, no, no, that would be an American thing. We have a prime minister. We don't actually celebrate him, so whatever."
It's like this isn't Christmas.
uh,
This is not based off of a religion, you know?
exactly.
That's really funny. But for some conscious of people tuning in, I've known Ken for a few years now. Probably when did we first meet? 4 or 5 years ago, somewhere around then.
Jeez, I don't know, man. Time flies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I seem to remember that it may have been in a bar in Seattle sometime around an MVP summit or something like that. Actually, wasn't it a bowling? No,
Even
what was
even
it? Mini
before
golf?
that, I think at one point we bumped in way back, even before I worked for Power Pivot Pro at like the Modern Excel user group down here. I thought you had,
That could be. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, you popped in as a for a presentation for one of them way back in the day. I was probably just one of the audience people who just shook your hand and said hi back then.
Well,
Yeah.
you know how that works now, right? I mean, like we go out, we present, and it's one of
Yep.
those things that I feel like sometimes I'm in cheers. I mean, everybody knows my name, and yet at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, I met 1,000 people last year, and I'm trying to remember, right? But it is interesting. I mean, and I know, and I'm sure you see this now too, is when you actually do get out to go to those presentations, you see the same faces over and over again as well, which is always kind of cool too, right? So as well as new ones.
Exactly. But
So
there's a point too where there's people who come up to you and act like they know you a bit, like they're so familiar with maybe what they've read, or and like and then you're like, wait, you're just thinking, have we actually met, or are you just very familiar with me because you're just a fan of the content that I create? And um, yeah, so I always try to approach it with it, just like, oh hey, good to see you, but like the kind of the ambiguous, like I'm not acknowledging that this is the first time or the second time we've met because I just don't know yet.
yeah, I say I'm really good with faces. I'm terrible with names, and try and,
Same.
and remember. And it's just, I mean, we meet so many people and whatnot. And I mean, the other thing that's weird, like I don't know for you. I mean, over the past few years, I mean, I'm hitting 4 or 5 different countries in a year, different cities within those, and whatever. So
Yeah.
it's when you show up and you're presenting 12-hour time difference, jet lagged, and people are coming up going, "Hey, how's it going?" And you're like, "Great." And I'm thinking, I don't even know where I am right now. So
I have one
but it's all
quick
good.
little. I have one quick snippet of that, and then I'd love just to have you give a bit of a background for the people tuning in. But a couple of years ago, when I went to the summit down in India, the Data Platform Summit, with the used to be SQL Geeks, now Data Geeks. It was like a 28-hour flight with layovers and everything to get all the way down there. And I just remember arriving at the hotel and one of the organizers was kind of interviewing speakers, and stuff. So like I'm checking in, and all of a sudden, camera crew and everything comes over and starts wanting to like interview me and talk to me, and I just know like my face has to look haggard, my hair is all up in wherever it's been from like sleeping on the plane. I just want to sleep, and I'm trying to like answer these questions and like get really excited about for like an interview footage, but it's just like no man, I just I need to go sleep for like 8 hours. I'm so jet lagged right now. But it's one of those, just moments where you're immediately realizing you have to be on game, but also having to travel internationally for a day and a half plus.
And yet, the one thing I will say on that is that, I mean, as much as we joke about it and whatever else, I mean, I recognize that very much that, when you walk into a room and somebody comes up and they want to talk to you about that, I mean, this is the reason why we have the careers we do, is so that the people
Yeah.
can talk to us. And I mean, it's important to make that time and
Oh
try
yeah.
and connect, even if we don't necessarily remember who each person is. I mean, treat everybody like, look, I'll give you the same answer whether I've known you for 1 year, whether I've known you for 5, or whether I just first met you, right? I mean, it's it's
Hmm.
about trying to get those points across and help people out there and whatnot. And it's that's what allows us to have the life that we do doing what we do. So
Agreed. And,
so,
and and for you, all they know a bit of background. We've known each other at least for a few years in that. But you've been doing work with Excel and Power Query for a long time now. That's your bread and butter. Power Query certainly has been the universe that you continue to swim in. You've had multiple books, a couple of courses, a very long-standing blog, and more recently, in the last few years, you've developed this MonkeyTools thing, which I'm excited to for you to kind of
yeah.
walk people through later today. But if you wanted to also give any other like background information on yourself, feel free.
Sure. So I just want to make sure it's known that, I mean, I'm certainly not a one-dimensional Power Query kind of guy. I mean, I also
Yeah.
do DAX work. I do I do dimensional modeling. I work in Power BI. I work with just plain old Excel stuff as well and
Yep.
whatnot. By trade, I'm actually an accountant, and so I'm a chartered professional accountant in Canada. Have been for geez, over 20 years, way too long now. And I used to actually have a real job once upon a time where I worked as a controller and director of IT of a company up on Vancouver Island where I live. About I'm going to say just over 5 years ago now, I actually quit my job, walked away from that, and decided I was going to do my own thing full time. I'd actually been doing stuff with Excel Guru part time. Since 2012, I think, is when I actually incorporated the company. But I've been doing stuff even before that. So so it's been quite some time. And basically, I mean, I joke now that, I mean, I travel the world and teach people how to use Excel and Power BI properly, and it's a life that I couldn't have imagined doing, and yet at the same time, I can't imagine not doing it now. I mean, I just have such a good time with it.
Yep.
As you mentioned, I mean, I do have a blog. I've got a forum at tedxlguru.ca. I'm one of the founding partners behind skillwave.training, which is a place you know and love, obviously, because we just got your data visualization course
Yep.
up there, which is awesome. So we've got some really good Excel and Power BI training there that we're super proud of. And in the middle, because I just didn't have enough hats that I was wearing, I decided to actually go and become a software developer as well. So that's where we've been building, and about, I'm going to say, just over 2 years ago now, I guess, we actually released that one, or maybe a year, I can't remember. We released MonkeyTools, which is an add-in for Excel that helps you do better work with Excel and Power BI as well. So
Yep.
lots of different hats, playing in a lot of different arenas, trying to keep things going, and make a decent living by helping people, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. So
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
and I very much enjoyed both you and a lot of the other people with Power BI. Like any kind of extra tool, or for Power BI specifically external tools. It's been really nice just to see the development community open up to create Power user tools for any kind of modeling and just reporting in general. So I still at some point hope to have something of my own, but I've loved the dozen that have popped up, because I think that it is allowing us to really cut down on the time for development for both power users and even users just getting into the tool sets to begin with. I think it's really like opening up a much broader universe of accessibility for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know certainly that's my goal when we're building stuff here. I mean, I
Hmm.
joke with people that I'm inherently lazy. I mean, efficient. And what I really like to do with things is that I like to save myself time, right? And I mean, this is one of the jokes around programmers, right? I mean, only a programmer will spend 40 hours trying to save themselves 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And yet I routinely end up doing this. And as I say, I mean, it blows me away when I look through the community at the different softwares that we have out there. I mean, I know there's a lot of them out there that are completely free. I mean, MonkeyTools isn't. We actually have a freemium model, so there are some free features and there's some pro features, but at the same time, I mean, our goal with these things is always to keep a certain level of things free, so that people will be able to use the tool to build better, faster. And then, for the stuff that we really dev hard into and we think has got real big value, we'll put those potentially behind a pro license. But the whole game at the end of the day is, my whole deal is I want to help you be able to build better quality work more quickly and be able to actually understand how it works once it's actually done, whether that was built by us or by someone else. And I think that those kind of philosophies sort of transcend just me. This is the kind of stuff when you look at other tools out there like Dax Studio and Tabular Editor and Power BI Helper and a bunch of other ones out there. It's all about trying to help people get more value out of these tools. And I think the big reason why that happens is because these tools on themselves are, it used to be like 5 years ago, Power BI, you can probably teach it in a day. Today, good Lord, now we need a week, right? And, or more. And, Excel, even longer, it's even more mature. So, when you look at these things being the Swiss Army knives they are that do all of this stuff, there's so many different ways to do things. And I think that's what's actually contributing to the rise of the ecosystem, these tools that we have, is that we all approach tasks in different ways. I will say personally, I don't even look at other people's software. I write my own the way that I think it should work, because I know that that's the way that I'll actually get my flavor out there and the way that logically I think as an end user counts and how to do things. So that's what sort of leads to our feature development, that and feedback from the people that actually use it, of course. So yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting world to play in. I'll say that for sure. So.
Yeah, and it's with any of them too. I've enjoyed just watching the evolution with a lot of these tools, and just even just to think about what they're going to have in 6 to 12 months, especially with the healthy user feedback that from everybody that I've talked to who's built one says that that's what have been one of the cornerstones of development, is just getting feedback from users who provide scenarios. Like, I never would have thought of this one function to do this, but for this business scenario, yeah, it totally makes sense to evolve it in this way to make it easier to do said action.
Yeah, I say one of the most dangerous things I run into when I'm demoing my own software is when somebody says, "Well, could you use it like this in a way that you've never thought of?" And then you go, "I don't know, let's try it," and then it crashes live on screen because you didn't anticipate that, right? Like, that's like the worst.
Yeah.
But it does happen, right? But at the same time, that's a really interesting experience, because then you actually get to look at it, and I think this is where I think you're starting to actually hit on a success point, is when users are using your tools in ways that you didn't anticipate it. That means that you actually built something that is much more robust than you ever thought it was. And I know I've had some 100%. Conversations back in the past with some of the guys at Microsoft, and they sort of said that same thing, is like, look, we don't even know what people do with some of these things anymore, and that makes us feel pretty successful, because now we've got something that's become bigger than what we actually thought it was. So
totally
I
agree.
will say also, totally gives me an appreciation for what the guys at Microsoft actually do with some of the stuff, because holy smokes, once you actually start releasing to a public audience, you realize that software development and anticipating what people will do with their software, that's a whole nother level of wow. It's interesting. So.
Yeah, there was actually I had a great conversation last week with Will Thompson about that, just where he talked a lot about how the development of the platform and the evolution of the platform goes, and a lot of that really just comes from both MVP and then community feedback. Because the best people who know how the tool should evolve are the people using the tool in many senses.
Yeah, absolutely. So.
If you want, I can switch over to your screen at any time. It is still showing the web browser right now, so I'll wait to do that just so we don't get the recursion.
Okay. Well, here, I'll tell you what. What I'm going to do is let's just quickly, if I can just hang on 1 second here, and
sure.
Throw up a slideshow here. I got a couple of graphics that I'm going to throw out. So one of the things I just like to cover off before I actually get into talking about the actual software itself and demoing is just a little bit of my philosophy of how I actually work with these things. So typically, being an accountant, I am an Excel guy first. Always have been. And even if I'm working in Power BI, I typically start my models in Excel first. When I'm building things up, though, whether this is Excel or Power BI is not actually relevant to what you're about to see here. This is really just about building data models, which go through, well, they start obviously from data. That's kind of an important thing, because if you don't have real data, you're making stuff up, and that's not really ethical. After we get to that part where we have our data, we need to extract it, we need to transform it and manipulate it, and get it ready for the dimensional models. So for those, we always use Power Query, and I actually break that into 3 different layers as I'm going through and building stuff. I've got a query that I'll connect to the database, which is my raw data query. This basically shows me everything that's available to me in a normalized fashion. That's about as much work as I do to just try and normalize the table and be able to see all of the rows and all of the columns that are there. It gets loaded as a connection-only query, and this is really, really important because those queries never actually get fully loaded to a data model. They only get called by something later on, so they can be reduced before you actually end up loading data. So it doesn't actually have a big performance impact at all. And any performance impact, in fact, in my test has been negligible.
Okay.
Once we do that, we move on to a staging layer. Staging is typically where I do the bulk of my data transformations, get it all ready to split it up into fact and dimension tables. And then once I've got those, I'll load my fact and dimension tables to the data model. So that's the sort of chain that I go through for actually laying things out and building these. Sometimes there can be more staging layers depending on what happens, but typically inside the fact and the dimension table queries, the only thing that's happening there is I'm either appending data from different staging queries, merging data from different staging queries, and always at the end of it, setting the data types on the columns before they get loaded to Power Pivot or to the Power BI data model, because that's a really important thing to do, is make sure your data is typed correctly. Once we have our tables, of course, then we go into the data model. That's where we go and re-relate them. We create our Dax formula, and then we go and we drop it into different visuals, whether that be in Excel, a pivot table, a chart, a table, whether it's in Power BI, be in any one of the gazillion different options that we have for visualization. So that's the philosophy that I go through when I build every single Power Pivot backed or Power BI backed solution that I have. It always goes through this kind of a layer here. Is particularly around the query part is an important part I sort of want to throw out there. As far as going through and sort of talking about my philosophy on the bigger whole, like I say, I start everything in Excel, and typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to build my queries in Excel, I'm going to build my data model in Excel, I'm going to build some pivot tables, check my data, make sure it's all good. When I'm ready to go and distribute that, what I'll do is I'll actually publish that directly to PowerBI.com. So right from within Excel, Office 365, you can go to Publish and you can export your workbook to Power BI. It basically, I like to explain it in layman's terms as converts your Excel workbook into a PBIX and uploads it all in one spot. So I basically got Excel as my original PBIX file. From there, I can actually build all of my reports in Power BI online because the data is already prepped up, it's clean and whatever else, all is good there. And then I can actually share it with the audience. So it's the Excel solution that backs my Power BI solution. There are occasions where that can't work. If you're putting in things like row level security and some other different components, maybe you need a more important or more powerful Dax formula than exists in Excel because the Dax in Power BI is a version newer. At that point, we might go through this import to Power BI desktop, build the reports, and publish to Power BI. But still, you know, my life has probably started in Excel. So this is just kind of the general philosophy that I go through as I work these things out. I have many solutions that are have never seen a PBIX file at all, and yet still are shared as a Power BI report, which is kind of an interesting thing here. And it's one of those things that I think really starts to illustrate the better together story. And this doesn't even talk about bringing it back to Excel with Analyze Excel or things like that, right? So just a couple of quick things about MonkeyTools I should probably peel off on this one. I mean, the target audience, just to be really, really clear, if you're inside Power BI 100% of the time and you don't use Excel anymore, you're probably not my target audience. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't want to be trying to sell you software you don't need. That's not my game. But if you are working in Excel, you're working with Power Query, you're working with Power Pivot, you also work inside Power BI, maybe you get files from other people that you want to try and figure out what the heck is going on in them. That's what we're all about. And so this is the place where I sort of like to play around and do the work that I'm doing. So you're going to see as we get into some demos here that everything is going to be Excel backed. Now there's a pricing model behind MonkeyTools. We've got a forever free version. You can download a free trial. It gives you the pro features with one exception for 2 weeks. I'll call out what that exception is a little bit later. And but then it reverts back to a forever free license. And a lot of the functionality that you're going to see today is under the forever free model. I am an MVP at heart. One of the big things that actually, one of the big things I really struggled with when I went and started my own business is how do I actually charge people for the stuff that I've been doing for free for years? And this is one of those components where the day that we put out before we even released MonkeyTools, my whole philosophy was, look, I want to be able to release something that I can put out for free that's going to help people. I think it's a really, really important part of who I am and what my philosophy is in life. But at the same time, I actually do have a developer on staff that I'm paying for this. So we do have a pro license subscription to help us support the development of these things going forward. This is not an open source tool. That's not what we're all about. you know, we are in-house dev and whatnot. So if you're interested in it, you can actually check out here at excelguru.ca/monkeystools. That's the home sales page for it. So what I'm going to do at this point, I think, if it makes sense, Reed, is probably cut over and actually start showing some demos on how this thing works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just mention the link to the MonkeyTools for people tuning in is just down in the description in the video.
Awesome. All right, cool. So let's start. Let's start here. Basically, what I'm going to do is I've got a nice little file here that I'm starting off with in Excel. And what I have right now is I have 3 different data tables. I'll show you those in a second. I'm missing a couple of tables that are kind of important. Calendar table, maybe a measures table if you're into that kind of thing, and definitely some measures. So if I go and take a look at it, it looks like this. So here's my raw data all set up. And typically, what you'll find from a user when they're working with Excel and trying to build a data model here is that the first step that they need to do is they need to go up to data, and they need to go to get data from sheet, and then they got to pull this into Power Query, make some manipulations, and they got to save it as a connection only or save it to the data model, and then they've got to go and do the same thing for the next table and the next table. And this kind of stuff drives me crazy because it's a lot of manual work. So in order to expedite the process, you can see here I've got my MonkeyTools ribbon. So there's lots of stuff that's on here, and we're going to go through a bunch of it. And I'm also going to show you a brand new feature that we just released as well that I think is very cool. But we're going to start with this guy here, Query Monkey. Now, typically what you're going to see here is we're divided into 2 categories. We've got these things called monkeys, and we've got these things called sleuths. The sleuth is one of those classic British words for detective. This is all about analyzing things to actually see what's going on. So you can think these are the Sherlock Holmes of your model, okay? Where the monkeys are, well, they're creatures that do things. So what we're going to start with here is we're going to go and we're going to take a look at my table monkey. So I should actually probably mention this is all inspired, of course, by the first book or second book that I wrote, which was Emma's for Data Monkey. I love my monkeys; it's awesome. So here we go. What we have is we have the table monkey, and what you'll notice is that this automatically populates with all of the tables, and it also does named ranges if you happen to have those in the workbook. Although I do have the ability to ignore named ranges because sometimes you get a lot of them and it doesn't make sense to bring them in. One of the important things that I want you to recognize about what we have here is that I may want to figure out where my tables are, because maybe you've called something table 1 or something like that and you don't know what it is. So I can actually go and click on these tables right here, and you'll notice that it's actually selecting them behind the scenes so that I can actually figure out where they are. This one, when I'm looking at it right here, is called budget, but everything else is plural. So I want to change that. So I'm just going to go right click on him right now, and I'm going to call him budgets. I've renamed it. It's renamed everything downstream. And the important part here is if I go to the table design, you'll notice that it's actually renamed it right here in Excel as well. So this just makes it a little bit easier for cleaning up those named ranges on tables. You'll notice that, yeah, you're trying to make form and function, right? Like it's the whole game here. So the idea here is we're going to create a raw data query for each one, a staging query for each one, and then these green ones here load to the data model. If I don't want to load to the data model, I can uncheck that. It'll create it as connection only. If I want less queries, I can dial that one up or down, and I can even go and dial all of these guys down on a global basis if I just want to go directly into the data model. Personally, as I say, prefer to do this. We have a few different options here about setting data types in your final query only or not, different ways to work with things. The other thing that's important here, every default you choose in here is a default that gets saved so that when you open up the form next time, it actually observes those kind of things. This is one of the things I wish Excel did for me, was actually controlled or sort of listen to the options and learn from them. So that's one of the things that we programmed in. I'm going to go and click create on this right now. And what it's going to do is it's going to go and it's going to actually create all of these queries. So you can see here that it's going through and it's actually loading these guys in. It's now loading the data model queries. These do take a little bit more time, of course, because the data needs to be loaded into the Power Pivot model. But here we go. Categories, budgets are done, and there's sales. So that took about 18 seconds. Trying to do this the manual way is probably more like about a 2-minute job. So, you know, you say programmed 100 hours into that thing just to make sure that I could save myself 2 minutes, right? But at the same time, I use this all the time. Right? Every time that I'm going through and I see a table that's got all these workbooks, it's like, boom, I can just pull these guys in. I can even replace tables if I need to do that. Now, that's cool. Did it go to the data model? Let's just check. So we'll go and take a look, manage data model. And if we open this up, you can definitely see the tables are in the data model. If I go over to diagram view, We can absolutely see that we've got some sales and we've got some budgets here, so I might want to go in and do some linking on these. I don't automatically make the links between the tables. I don't have a UI for dealing with that, but I figure that if you're working with Power Pivot, you know how this part works anyway.
Exactly.
So there we go. Now, we need another table in order to drive this, and this is one of the sort of the requirements that we had here is we need a calendar table. And this is something I'm super excited about. I absolutely love this this particular feature. I got a monkey for this. Right? So we don't need an app. I got a monkey. So if I go and take a look here, I've got this calendar monkey. Now, years ago, I actually built VBA scripts to build calendar tables, but the problem with them was that they didn't update properly, and that was always the challenge. So now what we're looking at here is we've got a full UI to actually look at building your calendar. And I know, Reed, you'd called out in the comments that you actually really like this one. You've seen this before, but for those that haven't, we can do 12 months, we can do 4-4-5, 4-5-4, 5-4, 13 months. I'm going to go with 12 months, but my year end is not December. So I'm just going to go and say, hey, let's go and take this back to September 30th. And it doesn't matter which year. All my data here is 2018, 2019 timeframe. I'm picking up September 30th, 2021. All I need is a valid year end. I don't need the valid year end for your data. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to build this. Now, normally I would actually build this, well, I'm going to show you how this works nice and quick here. If I pick up the sales table, it actually shortcuts me down and says, okay, these are your date columns that are in here. I actually want to build this one though against my staging sales, and because staging sales hasn't loaded to the data model, it's connection only, we can't enumerate the columns. So I just need to go in and actually say where it's coming from. But I'm going to pick this one up. I'm going to go staging sales and staging budgets. The idea here, this is going to pick the earliest date from the staging sales table and the latest date from the staging budgets table, and it's going to build a calendar that spans the entire fiscal years based on those values. So when I now go next, because I'm using a non-standard year end, it's actually picked up a couple of other columns over here. So I can go through and quickly check the things I want. Maybe I want the ISO week of year and the ISO precise format as well, but I can pick up all these columns that we actually want for the data model, my fiscal periods. If I were using a 4-4-5 calendar, you would also see a period ID column that comes over here for year ID, month ID, and things like that. So you can drive Rob Colley's greatest formula in the world pattern in order to make those comparisons. We're now going to go next, and it says, hey, sure, would you like me to add any relationships for you? And I say, yeah, let's relate this new calendar table to the budgets and the sales date columns. If you'd picked a column that loaded to the data model, so if I'd actually based this on sales and budget dates to begin with, those boxes would have automatically be checked for you because I'm just that lazy. I mean, efficient, okay? So it's all about saving clicks. And now I'm going to hit create. And what you'll see here is that my start date and end date down here have already been created, and the calendar is now loading the 1,096 rows to the model. It is also giving me some feedback that it's actually added the relationships, and it also tells me here, listen, there are some things that I actually can't do for you. I can't hide the field on the many side of the relationship. I don't have an option to do that. I wish I did. So there's some extra work here that you need to do. We also give you this thing to say, don't bother me about this next time, just close the window. But now if I go back into the data model and I go and take a look, here is my calendar table. It is all built from Power Query, so this will automatically refresh based on the bounds of the data that's there. And if I go into diagram view, you can see that this guy is all nicely linked up from date to date. The wording that it gave me before was, listen, we just want to make sure that you're going and you're saying, hey, I want you to hide this from client tools. You know what, while I'm here, why don't I do category? As a matter of fact,
does it automatically, when it creates the calendar table, does it automatically apply the sort by, or is that something you still need to go in to apply yourself?
No, unfortunately, that was another one of the notes that was in there. I can't control the sort by either. They just don't give me the opportunity to actually modify the sorting hierarchy, which is really frustrating, honestly. So inside here, I actually have to do that part manually too. And that was actually one of the notes there as well. So I'm going to sort the month here by the month of fiscal year.
Yep, okay.
And while I'm here, just to be nice and clear, we'll also do this one too. We'll do the day because, you know, hey, why not? So
yep.
I'll sort that one by day a week. Believe me, if I could automate this, it would have been done because this drives me crazy. And I always forget to do this now, right? So,
yeah.
But you can see that I got my ISO weeks. I got my ISO week precise here. And if I go back and actually take a look at the calendar query, this is one of the things that I'm super proud of with MonkeyTools too, is we have a do no harm philosophy. We only inject stuff into your workbook when you ask us to. But what have we injected? We've injected the query. So if you want to actually go and take a look at or modify the whole thing, Every step is there, and it follows the patterns that we actually use, that we teach at SkillWave, that we've got written up in books and blog posts and whatever else. So all of this kind of stuff is all there. So you can modify, remove columns, add new columns. It's pretty important, I think, that we observe that stuff. Made anything, it's all user driven and whatnot. All right, let me see what else. Oh, I know. One of the other things I said. Now, I'm not personally on the philosophy of using measure tables. I prefer to store all of my my items right on my fact tables that are linked in my models. But you know what? It's not about what I want. It's about what you potentially want. So we have the ability here to add a measure table. So I'm just going to call this underscore measures. Something important here, you can't use the word measures because measures is a reserved word inside the data model. So, but you can use underscore measures or space measures. So I'm going to go with that and basically say okay. And you'll see that we have a new connection only, and there we go, one row loaded. And it says, look, there is something you still need to do. We need you to right click and hide the measures column. And this is just to make sure that we prevent any issues later on. So we'll jump in. Again, if I could automate this, I totally would do that. But right click, hide from client tools. All right, cool. Now, at this point, we've got stuff. So we can go and say, hey, look, you know what? I want to build a pivot table. When I build up MonkeyTools, like I say, we've got sleuths and we've got monkeys. We also have some convenience features, and these are basically just Excel features that we actually bring across. So I've got a pivots and filters menu here. I'm going to insert a pivot table from the data model. And right there, we're going to go with existing worksheet. We'll drop it in here. And I've just realized that I've forgotten something kind of important. I have no measures at this point. So I can easily go and say, cool, let's put a fiscal year on rows, and let's put our month short on my fiscal year. You'll notice that it is sorting in my September 30th month-end order, so that's good. But I need measures. So I'm going to go create measures. Now, I love Dax. It's a great language. But one of the things that I love about Power Query is that in Power Query, I can actually click buttons to write code. I can't do that in Dax. I can write formulas. And I actually think that that's a big drawback to the way things are working. So, so we decided to fix that problem. So I've got a couple of different measure monkeys here. The first one is just for basic explicit measures. Now I know Power BI has a smart measures, or is that what it's called?
Quick measures.
Quick measures, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, the thing that always bothered me about the quick measures from Power BI though is that they never gave you the ability to create a basic measure. It was always more complex stuff. I'm like, for the people that I teach, they're trying to get started. You know what? Equal sum of a column is still a little bit weird because they're still trying to sum A5 to D5, right? It's just a little bit different. So I can do this now. I can say sales. From my sales table, maybe I want the amount. Well, here's the Dax formula for the sum of amount column, but what if I want a count? Or what if I want to count the blank rows or count distinct values? Or maybe I want to go into an average, or I need a standard deviation for the population. Every time I make one of these changes here, it's actually changing the Dax formula down the bottom here. And it updates the measure name for me. Now, I don't need any of these fancy ones or whatever, but I want a sum. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to go and say, maybe call this sales dollars or something like that. So if I'm looking for a one-off simple measure, this is a nice way to be able to actually drive through the UI with clicks to actually be able to write the code. Having said that, I'm actually going to cancel this one. And the reason why is because I've got another monkey over here, which is our multiple measure monkey. The concept behind this one is it comes back, it says, look, if you need a measures table, we can add one right here for you, but we've already identified you have one because we have some specific properties that we look for. So we know that you're going to store your measures there, but if you want to change it, you are absolutely able to change it to the host table or a specific table, whichever. We give you some filters to look at specific tables as well. So if you want to see your dimensions, we can bring those in. I don't like to store facts on dimensions, so I usually have that one unchecked, and a couple of different options down the bottom here. The important part about this monkey, though, is we do this. Right off the bat, I got budgets, and it creates me a basic sum on my numeric column. And I'm going to say, cool, let's call this one budget dollars. We'll store it in a currency format. Awesome. We're going to make another one over here. This one here is going to be called sales dollars. And I think I'm going to add another aggregation, this one, against the sales table itself. We're going to count the rows, and we're going to call this guy here transactions. And it's formatted as a whole number. So we try to be smart about the data types that we use. We also store some defaults based on the previous screen as to what you have there. What's cool about this now? Create. It's gone through and it's created all three of those measures. It's stored them on the measures table. Here they are. So now I can go and say, show me the transactions, the sales, and the budget. And there we go. Now, let's interesting. I've got
fantastic.
my budget go funny, but hey. But yeah, so nice and quick and easy with this. You know, depending obviously on how many visible or how many columns you have in your different tables and your data model and what you pick up, obviously it can go a little bit slower. But the nice thing there is that you can actually do a whole bunch of measures in bulk very, very quickly. And we have designs honestly on adding a lot of stuff to this menu. We are currently working on some stuff around time intelligence measures and whatnot. I know other vendors do that, but the bonus for me on this one is that for those of you using Excel, my stuff is right in Excel on the canvas where you're working. You don't have to reach out to a third party, or, well, I guess you are reaching out to me as a third party, but you don't have to go out to another application and actually try and do it somewhere else and copy and paste. Because copy and paste, let's be honest, is so 1995, it's not even funny, right? So,
Agreed.
So that's the basic. I mean, you know, what did we just do here? I mean, we just walked through from 3 basic, you know, tables here, and we actually built a full-blown data model out of this whole thing in a few minutes. And I mean, this is the cool thing here, playing around with this kind of stuff, is that we've got a data model. You can see our measures are all there, and the calendar table is there. And now if things change, because everything is driven by Power Query, the data increases, we just hit data refresh all and everything's good to go, which is
I have a quick question about the measure creation tool. It's from Marshall. He wanted to know, so essentially, is there any way to create like some X, or I would even expand to say X, any kind of X function using the create measure feature?
Yeah, so iterator functions. At this point, no. That is something that we look at. I mean, honestly, as it stands right now, we've done a ton of work in the Power Query space with things, because obviously, as Reed sort of pointed out, that's one of the areas where I have a big claim to fame. As we start looking through and sort of building up this tool to make it more robust, there are a lot of other options we want to look at, and definitely creating measures is an area where I see that there is a huge potential to actually go and add a whole bunch of stuff. The challenge is, of course, is that when we start getting into iterator functions, we need to look at them very differently than what we actually have inside this, because oftentimes with an iterator function, we want to make sure that measures exist beforehand, because we want to feed a measure into an iterator function. We need to be able to choose which columns we're actually working with and different things like that. So it is something that is not in our current short-term development plan, but it is in our longer-term plan. So just keep that in mind. It will come one day, but the reality is you got to give me some time. That's all. But if you have ideas, I mean, I'd love to hear them too. So for sure.
At least the nice thing with that is it's fairly rinse and repeatable. Like, once you know how to write a sum X, you can do an average X or min X, max X, and it's often like I feel like my formula almost always follows the pattern of values of some column and then the base calculation. Yeah.
Well, exactly right, and I mean, and this is the same thing. Like, I mean, when you look at the UI for what we've got for this thing here, right? I mean, your sum function is this, but I mean, you change it to a count. Well, you got 4 different options for your count. I mean, the pattern is pretty. It's really just about swapping out the function here. So this part isn't hard. The part, I guess, the trick with all of this stuff in software is there is stuff that is really hard behind the scenes, and we need to make it look really, really easy and intuitive for the user. There's also stuff that's really easy behind the scenes, but it's like ridiculously hard for the end user to actually access. So it's trying to actually, go through the right UI design to come up with things that are rinse and repeatable. One of the things I love about Dax, it's all about patterns, right? So as long as I can actually build a UI that helps you choose the right pieces from the pattern, then we can actually make it work with. And I know that I mean, my developer Abdullah that's working on this, I mean, I've actually just run him through my self-service BI bootcamp and said, look, I want you to really take this and really understand this. And every time we talk, and he's actually out there now building models for friends and stuff like that as well, which is cool, because I mean, when he came to me, he's a programmer. He didn't have the background in the business intelligence side. But one of the things I keep telling him is every time you're at a Q&A session and somebody's asking you these things, what I want you to be thinking about is, boy, that looks like a pattern that I've seen before. Could we make this faster? Could we actually save people time by actually putting user interface on it to actually drive it? So that's sort of what our philosophy is as we're going through and trying to figure out how to make things work. So.
Like you used the analogy just a couple of times of, developer, will spend 40 hours to do 2 minutes to save 2 minutes. But the other one that I like is if you want something done, you just you give it to the average designer, or coder. But if you want something done effectively, you give it to the lazy coder, because they will find a way to do it and get the job done, but as an effective and shortest time as possible.
Yeah. Even though it may cost them more time along the way, right? So.
Well, yeah, exactly.
But so let me. I'm not going to go through and demo all of these things here, but there are a couple of other things that we can do that I think are important just to call out here.
Sure.
If you've read M is for Data Monkey, for those folks that have, you'll know that one of the techniques around chapter 24 or so of my book is to inject a parameter table inside your workbook, or create a parameter table inside your workbook and an fn get parameter function, so you can dynamically pass things from Excel cells into your queries. That involves setting up a specific table and setting up a specific query. And in the book, I mean, we give you the query so you can type it by hand. Ooh, yuck, because it's long. Or download a text file where you can, again, copy and paste. Again, so 1995. This is the kind of stuff that, like, that's way too much work for me. So I can just click the button and boom, it's done. There we go. So the table is here. We even put in the file path component here. And there is the function right there ready to go. Now, this is all cool and everything else until you hit one of these that starts off with HTTPS / because now it's going to SharePoint. So now we've got problems because I'm trying to dynamically set my file path. So I'm not going to go through this one today, but there is a smart folder function. Everything above the line here, these things are in our always free, forever free kind of lineup. Some of the things down below here, though, certainly the calendar monkey, the SCD2 monkey, these guys here are under the pro license, but they do work inside the trial. We have this one here under the pro license, which is called the smart folder query. This one, when you inject it, is actually creates a separate function, and it does a files list from folder, but it's smart enough to recognize that, hey, guess what? This time when I opened up the workbook, it came as HTTPS. I'm going to switch it out to the SharePoint equivalent because they use different connectors. So if you're trying to make your files grow across different areas, it's super, super helpful. In addition, if you've ever run into the slowly changing dimension problem, suddenly you got a customer, they move, you got 2 records in their table, and it blows up on you when you're trying to refresh. We have, now I can't demo it with this file because this one's not compatible with it. We don't have the right things in it, but we have an entire slowly changing dimension monkey that will actually help you set up all of the queries. Inside my dimensional modeling course, we spent about an hour teaching you how to do this. The monkey here does it in about a minute. So it makes a life pretty easy in a lot of cases here. We deal with using surrogate keys that have meaning, surrogate keys that don't have meaning, and again, all dynamically driven off of the data that's actually there. We also have the ability, if you're forum posting, I love this one here, I can just create query from M code, drop my M code right in here, and hit create, and boom, it creates it right away. So if I'm trying to actually look at what a user's created, I can actually grab the thing out of a forum and paste it right there, make a query nice and easy. No new query from other sources, go to the data, or go advanced editor, too much work. So, like I say, all about being lazy or efficient.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like that's what sells things is ROI, right? I mean, and I'm sure you've had this experience in the past. Like you're trying to sell Power Pivot. Like, what's the value? Like, Power Query honestly was one of the number one things that I sell people on. Is even if you just ignore the modeling aspect, if you're saving a worker 5 hours a week on automation just from being able to like combine from a folder, there you go. That alone pays for the cost of like this different SKU or anything else. And there's so many things in here that shave seconds in time off of stuff.
Yeah. My favorite button in all of Excel is refresh all, right? And I mean, that's what everything I build is all about that, because let me tell you, I mean, I spent lots of years going through and doing the manual refresh the hard way, taking days and days and days to actually update my data. Oh man, like I don't miss that at all. So, all right, let's move into some sleuthing. We know what we've actually built here. We've got a pivot table here, but I want to look at my queries now. One of the things that always drives me crazy about Power Query is when I go to double click and edit and go into Power Query, I can't move back and forth within my Excel workbook. In addition, the tracing view is currently weak, I'm going to say. So I actually built this query sleuth, and the concept behind the query sleuth here is that we have it would help if I actually click the corner and not the worksheet behind it. But the concept behind the query sleuth is that this actually gives you a tree view of the queries that have actually been used in order to drive up this model. We automatically indent, we do some syntax highlighting in the pro version. The free version, this works, but you don't get the colorful syntax highlighting, okay? You still get the indentation though. So you'll see staging budgets here is highlighted in yellow. That's because that's a precedent query for what we have. If I go and take a look at it, we can see the M code for it, and we know that it goes back to raw data budgets here. If I look at calendar, this one's a much more complex one. We can actually see that it's got an fn get ISO week function that's buried right into it, which is quite long. And then we can see the source, number.from start date, number.from end date. This is a pattern that I teach all over the place. What's start date, what's end date? Well, here's end date. Let's take a look. Oh, okay, cool. Here's the entire pattern. All right. So the concept here is that you can see the M code. And if I need to, I can go and actually interact with Excel, and then I can go back to it really, really quickly and play around with it. I can make edits to the code. I can update them. I can force the Power Query to refresh after I update it. So there's a lot of different functionality we have in this. One other kind of cool feature, this is sort of an accident that we created. We have the ability in our display options to show endpoints only. And what that means is this is the last part the query loads to, whether it loads to a data model or whether it loads to a connection only. And if you actually click on that, you'll notice that I've got FN parameter here. Well, I injected that into the worksheet, but I've never used it. What that means, I can actually remove this query from the workbook and it won't affect anything. So I can actually identify orphaned queries by using these endpoint only. Anything that shows up in connection only with this is an orphaned query that isn't needed. So I can actually remove it.
I think you mentioned, or somebody else said, I remember at one point, like, there was a thread somewhere where somebody was talking about, like, they use this very specifically for removing orphan queries. And I think you hadn't originally thought of it being used that way, like kind of explicitly as a tool, but it became so handy because I've definitely had enterprise workbooks where, and most of mine is in Power BI these days, still sometimes in Excel. But if you have like 130 or 140 queries, there's no button in the editor to kind of just show orphan queries. But this really quickly, oh yeah, okay, yeah, these were from like a previous iteration. We forgot to delete that. Yeah.
And I say, like, this totally was not a design that we actually went after. It just happened to be an accidental feature that came out of it, which is pretty cool, right? So,
yeah.
So, I mean, I don't usually leave this on, but again, we save this as a default. So if that's what you're actually looking for, next time you open up this thing, it will actually show that way. There is a legend that we use to actually describe what's going on here. So that's what the yellow queries are connection only. So you can actually get a really good view here too as to where your queries actually load just based on the actual color. Which is also handy. So if you're loading to worksheet, you'll see a lot of blue here. Typically, I load either the connection only or the data model. I don't have a lot of need to actually load to two different places, but if you do, there you go. You can also trace by precedence or dependent. So backward and forward, if you ever get one of those clients that's a scope changer that keeps on shifting the basis of what you're working on, sometimes you need to trace it by dependence to figure out what you're going to blow up if you actually change something. So there's a few different options around the way here. So that's our query sleuth. I won't do a demo on time sleuth. I've got other things that I want to show you, but this is basically just a rudimentary timer for Excel. It doesn't work on Power BI queries, but it does work on Excel queries as long as they load to a different destination. At this point in time, what you can do is you can actually time it. You can even actually run it and do some charting across the different iterations to see, run it over 5 instances and see how the refresh time actually works, or chart the difference between privacy on and privacy off and different things like that. So some cool things there. We've got a cool little pivot sleuth function here. If you've ever been in a scenario, and actually let's just replicate this because this is always kind of fun. I'm going to go right click and unhide from client tools here. So we're going to set my measures back with one visible column. And one of the things that drives people crazy when you do that is you get this relationships between tables may be needed. Why? I hate this message. And you click and you say, go away, and then you open up the workbook and it comes back again, right? It's like, what the heck?
Yep.
So
Fair.
If you're ever trying to figure out what's going on with that, our pivot sleuth will actually tell you what's going on. And it comes up and it says, look, here's what we've actually identified. We've got a couple of different things over here. And if we go and take a look at it, it says, look, this doesn't have a relationship path and can't filter budget, sales, and transactions. So if that relationship path isn't there, we have a bit of a problem. If we take a look at this guy here, it also tells us that measures is a disconnected table. So the measures are going to calculate properly, but they're going to cause a relationship between tables may be needed. This is available in the free version, but it's very much something that I think is important because a lot of people, particularly who get started with Power Pivot, don't understand why the heck they get this, or worse, don't actually understand dimensional modeling. This doesn't teach you dimensional modeling, but it does actually give you back some context-sensitive help as to what's going on. This actually tells you if this is intended to be a measure table, flag it as such by hiding all the unaggregated columns. So say, okay, you know what? Let's give that a shot. So let's go back to the data model, right click, hide from client tools. There we go. So when relationships may be needed goes away, we get the cool little measure icon. And now if we go and we take a look at Pivot Sleuth, you'll notice that we get a nice clean bill of health because there's no colors on there at all. So this is also really handy though. because we also enumerate your slicers and your timelines, which could be on hidden worksheets.
Oh, okay,
So
yeah,
sometimes
fair.
if you're trying to work out your filter context and you're going, what's going on? This is a handy tool to say, what the heck is in play on this pivot table that I'm not seeing? And that'll actually give you an indicator as to what's going on. So
That's really useful. I mean, I know one of the number one
yeah,
features in Power BI that I like to use is just like when they finally added that little icon that showed you everything that was filtering an object, because it, I've definitely over the years in Excel spent many years like cutting and pasting into different pages to kind of like try to reverse engineer what is talking to this thing, as
yeah.
far as filtering goes. So that's very helpful.
Now, I mean, on that note, I'm just gonna go quickly here and turn on a beta feature that we're playing around with as well. I wasn't gonna do this, but let me show you this. We have something here for a filter context measure that I can actually create as well. And when I go and do that, I just got to remember, yeah, where did I store it? So this guy here will actually tell you exactly what is actually going and filtering your pivot table as well. The only trick with this one is you do need to go and wrap the text in order to actually see what's going on. But for each component here, will tell you what is actually filtering. So if you start throwing a timeline on there or whatever else, those fields will actually show up in there as well. So kind of a neat thing. That's a coming soon kind of thing. We're still playing around on that, and that was a user request that came back saying, look, I know that Dax Studio can give this stuff to me and whatnot, but I've got to go and reach out to another tool to go and build this. Is there any way you could import from Dax Studio? And we said, no, we got all the information. Let's just run it and put a UI on it. So that'll be coming out at some point in time in the future. It's just not quite tested and ready quite yet. So like I say, we got some other dev things that are going along the way. Let me show you Dax Luth here. Dax Luth is kind of a cool one as well. This is similar to our pivot sleuth. Basically what we've got is now all the measures on these ones here are, well, this one are relatively straightforward and fairly easy and whatnot, but we do some indenting. Granted, we use our indenting logic behind this here, but basically you can see the entire measure here all in an indented format. If I want to make changes to this, I can actually update that right into the data model as well. This, by the way, if you're connected to a Power Pivot or Power BI model, you can actually update back to the Power BI model for these as well. I'm not honestly sure why you would be editing your Power BI DAX from MonkeyTools, but you can if you want to, right? So, and if somebody comes up with a great use case, I'd love to hear it. But we have some different some different options in this around as well as with things indent and unindent. I think are fairly straightforward. But one that makes sense, or one that may not make sense, and it doesn't really show in this particular model, is something like Flatten. Actually, I'll tell you what. Let's make this work. So I'm going to go create myself a new measure over here. I'm going to store it on my measures table, and I'm going to call this one neg sales. And basically, all this is going to be is this is going to be my sales dollars times -1. We're just going to keep this nice and easy, make it a currency with no decimals. There we go. So we've now got neg sales, and here we go. We put it on, flipping the sales around. No big deal.
Fantastic.
But what if I'm looking at trying to figure out what's going on with this? Well, if I open up the Dax Luth, you can now see that neg sales has actually turned green. So what's that all about? Well, it's a measure with a child. And we also pick up implicit versus explicit measures. So this is another component that's always kind of fun. Of course, everybody always has these kind of things happening where, they grab a day of month and they click on it. And because it's numeric, it automatically adds it here. And we get a sum of day of month. And you go, well, that's frustrating. And you take it off. Well, if we go back to Dax Luth now, you'll notice that these measures do not disappear when you take them off your pivot table. An implicit measure sticks around. You actually have to go through, show them in the data model and get rid of them explicitly. But you can see right away that I've actually got one of these things hiding in my model. So if I'm building this for a client, the first thing or one of the last things I do before I send it off to the client is I'll actually just hit it with Dax Luth and I'll go and clean up all of these accidental things because I want to look like I know what the heck I'm doing, right? So, and I don't use implicit measures. But let's take a look at neg sales, right? So filter context, we got a big measure there. Sales is regular and easy. Count rows, okay? But if I look at neg sales, what you can see here is we got sales times -1. Cool, that's the formula. If I double click on it, I can actually see the child measure. So I can say, oh, well, that's sales. What was sales? It's that. Okay, cool. Here's the next part, is that you can also do this. We can flatten the measure down. So if I want to see it all in one place, we hit flatten, and what it'll do is it actually brings the child measure, replaces it, and wraps it into calculate so that the filter context, comes across, or the transition context comes across correctly. This is kind of handy sometimes when you're trying to figure out how your measures actually put together, so you don't have to flip pages back and forth and whatnot. So we also duplicate measures. It basically would pop up and say, okay, what's the name you want? And it'll create an exact copy with the formatting, and then you can actually make changes to the measure itself. So if you're just doing something where you're just changing a calculate and one filter, sometimes it's easier to just hit duplicate here, create a duplicate measure, change the formula, and hit update, and away you go. I'd still like to do better with that, but that's something that that definitely works as well. Now, a couple more sleuths before I move into something really cool here. How are we doing time-wise, Reed? What do we got? We're
good. You can keep going. Yeah. I normally like if needed, we can go up into like 10, 15. Since you definitely have a couple of cool things to show. So
awesome. Under our model sleuth, this is the one feature that I'm going to show you right now that is not fully functional inside the Pro trial. This one here, you actually do need to pick up a Pro license if you want the fully functional version of this. What it does is it actually runs a full report over your data model to come back and tell you what the heck is actually in there. We believe that this one here is pretty important and pretty valuable to people, and this is why we actually have a Pro license on there, because I mean, I actually sent this off to one friend at one point in time, and he goes, holy cow, he says, that would have just saved me, 2 days worth of documentation for the client that I just did. And I kind of figure if I'm saving you 2 days of documentation on the client, and you're charging them for it, you can actually throw me, a little bit of money to help me out with my development here. So basically what we do, we enumerate the number of tables, relationships, measures, how much memory the model is actually consuming, how many queries are loaded to the data model versus connection versus worksheets. This one's important to me. This is one of the red flags I actually look at when I'm actually dealing with things too. How many data connections are not loaded through Power Query? So if it's coming from, say, you connect directly to SQL because you built your model in 2011 and Power Query wasn't out, that's where we find out. Or you take a table and you've linked it directly to Power Pivot for Shane. It should always go through Power Query so you can change it later. These are kind of things that I actually look at. We take a look at what are the relationships that are actually here, the filter directions, what's the cardinality. Now in Excel, of course, the cardinality is always made to 1 because it's the only option we have. But the fact that I added that column is kind of an important indicator as to what this actually means to you. We'll get to that in just a second. We've got our tables, some observations. If it's disconnected, if it's snowflaked or something like that, I'll actually tell you that. How many rows are there? Because that kind of drives compression. Well, it definitely drives compression. Where is it actually coming from? There's a whole bunch of table column stats. Data types are particularly important for compression. What's hidden, what's visible, things like that are all listed in this side as well. If it's a calculated column, you'll see the Dax expression right here. Here's all your measures. What type of table are they stored on? Looks like sum of day of month was stored on a dimension table. That's not a good idea. It's also implicit, also not a good idea if you can avoid it. We see the Dax formulas here. Something that's important on this one, and again, this was a request from one of my users, is that this is actually a table. So if you turn on the filter buttons here, you can filter within these things. And this is important for 2 reasons. Number one, because it can actually help you narrow things down really quick. I mean, we don't put these on because we don't really want to print it that way in a report. But if you happen to have Dax Studio and you want to use Dax Studio's indenter with this, it needs to be in an Excel table. So now we're Dax Studio compatible as well, which is important, right? I mean, there's an even more interesting world, Reed. Now we're getting to the point where we're trying to make tools play with other tools, right? Not just Excel. So this is also true down the bottom here. We have all of our queries. Okay, so it tells me where the data sources are coming from, what's the precedent, what's the dependence. And this is also something that's super important to recognize this as a table, because here's another little trick. If you go and you filter your precedent type for everything that is not blank and not a query, you now have a list of all of your external data sources. Done. So that's kind of cool as well. If you're trying to figure out what the heck is actually working. Now, XLG parameters is actually a current workbook query. These are actually current workbook queries. But if you had something that was coming from, say, a SQL.database, it would actually show up here with the address of the SQL database and whatnot as well. So, like I say, we think this is a pretty handy little report for a quick summary as to what's going on. When I'm actually talking in different Ask the Expert sessions in conferences, when we're allowed to do those kind of things, post-COVID, every time somebody brings me a question about their data model, I ask them to put it on a USB stick and run this off it, and then we delete the copy on the USB afterwards. But this gives me a really quick view of what's going on in their model, so I can sort of make some targeted recommendations on things.
I mean, and in
Another
general,
handy
just like I was just gonna say, like documentation is one thing that I think almost everybody hates. So it's really nice when
oh
there's
yeah,
any tool that can just give you like, okay, can you give me like a schema breakdown of the model relationships, filters, measures, dependencies? Like, yeah, here you go. They like,
yeah,
and this way there's nothing missed, and it you don't have to go through line by line and update and remove. It auto generates every time. So I
yeah,
very much appreciate
absolutely.
anything that does this.
If you're looking for performance tuning, memory usage chart is always a handy thing here. I've been doing this for years manually, but I thought it would be much, much easier if I could just, click a button and actually have it come back and tell me what's going on. So I actually have a course that I teach for CPAs on how to actually make your data model more efficient. And it's all about, reducing your unique values and making sure you've got the right data types in your columns and things like that, and figuring out which columns aren't being used so that you can remove them. You'll notice that for me right now, I've got, if you want to get really geeky, we can break it down to the hash and memory encoded values and whatnot as well. But we actually do go back and track on some of the different things that are being used and aren't and whatever else as well. So there's some handy stuff there. I have an unused items report. This one here will come back and should tell me that there is a measure that I have not used. I created it, put it on the pivot table, took it off, so that measure could be removed from the model. There's an implicit measure there that can be removed, and there's a query that's not being used as well. So I get a pretty quick hit on some of the items that can actually be nuked out of the model to actually save some space as well. So that's kind of a cool thing. Now, I should also just throw out there that if you are a DMV kind of person, we also have a Dmv extractor, so you can actually play around and play around with different Dmv reports as well. I won't get into that because it's a pretty specific area, but you can actually write your Dmv queries here and load them directly to a table as well, which is kind of handy and the way we use to enumerate some things as well. Now, what I want to show you right now, though, is I want to show you another component here around some things. So I'm just going to go and close this workbook. And we're going to get into a couple of pretty cool pieces here. So I'm going to go and open a blank workbook right now, and I'm going to go and connect. I can connect to an active workbook, different specific workbooks that are around, MonkeyTools backups, but I want to connect to a Power BI file for a second here. And the model that I'm going to use right now is this LP Azure, and hopefully, yep, there we go, nice and loaded. If it wasn't already loaded, I would have to load, but here is a copy of this particular Power BI file. You can see that it's got a few different tables that are actually in there. There's some hidden columns around some different stuff and whatnot. It's got a bunch of pages of reports. I've got a metrics table over here that's got a bunch of measures on it. And I want to know a little bit about what's going on inside this model. So I'll go and run a model summary on it. And boom, there we go. There's my documentation for this guy
Nice.
here. Got a whole bunch of stuff. It's got a lot of space that's being used in it here. There's disconnected. There's a snowflake table. I get all my column stats. I get my measure stats. I got my queries down the bottom here as well. So again, if I come back and say, show me the filter button and filter this for everything that's not, oops, we want SQL, not those, then boom, there we go. It's telling me that there's one SQL database. Now I am going to have to sleuth this back to figure out what this is, but at least I now know where I'm going for it, right? So that's kind of cool. So that's neat. But now here's the question. If I build an Excel, I can take this model, go to Power BI Desktop, and I can import it into Power BI Desktop.
Yep.
But I like to build an Excel. What if somebody's actually built their model inside Power BI, but I want to do some more work with it inside Excel? There's no route to import a Power BI model into Excel.
Yep.
At least there wasn't. And this is the thing that we're announcing live on here. This has been out in the build now for a week. If I go to import BI model to Excel here, you'll notice that I am connected to my Power BI model with SQL Azure, and it says, listen, we've identified here that we got a bit of a problem. Table metrics was not generated by Power Query. And if we go back and we look at this, here's table metrics. And I look at transform data. What you'll actually see here is that indeed there is no query inside this thing here that's called metrics. It just doesn't exist. Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason is all about how I actually built this. When I built my metrics table, I didn't use Power, which is what I would do today. I just clicked enter data and built a new table right off of that. Okay.
Yep.
So that's a bit problematic for what I have here. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually import this, but there's a problem with that. So we have this cool thing here that says generate missing tables with Power Query. So this is an option that will come back and say, look, would you like to, even if you can't find the table with Power Query, would you like me to build you an empty stub for that? And this is super, super important because that's where all my measures live. If I don't create that table, I can't bring across my measures. In addition, we also give you the option to add error handling protection to the data model queries. What that means, we read the columns and data types from the original table. We hash up a blank table with one row that basically says, okay, cool, this is the data types that you actually have for these columns. We make you a blank stub for the table, and then we basically try to do your import, and if it fails, we return the blank stub. This is also super important because if you don't have the blank stub, I can't create relationships and I can't create measures because the table won't load to the data model, so it doesn't exist. So by doing this, we ensure that it always exists. We can do queries only, we can do data model only, whichever. Here's what I want to do first, though. I want to actually just make really, really certain we're in book 2, and I want to show you that there really is no data model here. So at least, come on, hopefully. It's going to let me do it. All right, what's going on with that? Let's try and do it from this button here. Is it going to be complaining? Oh, no. Hopefully I haven't been running too long on these guys here. You're running behind the scenes? Oh, no, here it is. Okay, it was open on this side here. Looks like the wrong one. Let's try this again. So book 2. Oh, shoot. I see that we've got a power on Excel that's decided to start crashing on me. I'll tell you what. I'm going to restart Excel right now. We're going to give this a shot and make sure that this one's going to play nicely here. Okay, so let's go and reconnect to our Power BI model. Hopefully this one won't make me restart Power BI. Sometimes it does, but hey. So we're going to go MonkeyTools again. We're going into our demos. We're going into Power BI models and LP Azure. I guess I must not have, figures. Must not have prayed that that's quite enough. Let me just close this one down and don't save. Unfortunately, there's still some instability behind the scenes with these guys, and every now and then we get burned by this kind of stuff. But let's try again. Power BI. Hopefully, it's had enough time to shut down properly. And here it goes. So, so this is the normal experience. You're going to connect to something. It's going to go and pop open. It runs Power BI. I am still looking for a way to make Power BI open up behind Excel. It always wants to load and drives me absolutely insane, but I don't want to load it as hidden because then I would have a hidden instance of Power BI running on your machine, and that would be really, really bad. Again, back to
that's fair.
Do no harm philosophy, right? So what we should see as soon as we get to a page where Power BI is actually starting to load its visuals, our Excel model here has loaded, so we are good. Even though Power BI is still behind the scenes, it's all good. And if I go and just quickly run my model summary, we should be able to, except for the fact that I'm competing with the core here, this should actually go relatively quickly to actually prove that we actually have access to the data. So there it is. Cool. So let's go back to the import. All right. All right, so again, I should probably just demo real quickly here on this one and make sure that we have no data model in here. That was what I was trying to do the first time around. And there we are. It is one completely blank data model. Nothing here, nothing up my sleeve. That was the important part that I was actually trying to show. So with this now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to click import. And at this point here, it is now going through each and every query, and it is actually loading them into the workbook. So it's creating the actual Power Queries themselves. Thank you. Don't really need my PDF software. No, thank you. Oh, geez. You know, I love software. It's awesome when it decides to get involved at the same time. Anyway, it's creating the queries. So, so that's the first stage. Now, each of these, of course, has to load to the data model. So this does take a little bit of time. The kicker that we have with this one, unfortunately, is that I can't create all the queries and then load them all at once and take advantage of child node caching. So this does take a little bit of extra time because it has to load each one individually. I have one very complicated Power BI file with all kinds of crazy stuff in it that takes about 25 minutes to run. This one won't be nearly that long, despite the fact that it is about, I think it's about 4.5 megabytes of size as well. So it's not a small model. But the key on this one is we just got to let it run through. That's the last table shifts for the queries that are being imported, and then it comes back and it says, okay, cool, I'm going to create you a new query for that metrics table that didn't exist. So so we're going to go and we're going to get that one, and then we're going to start peeling across and doing our different relationships. Here they go. and it's going to chunk those guys off, and then it'll jump in and start doing measures. Now, I should call out while we're doing this, there are things that we can't do. As we already know, we can't hide columns in the data model, so we're going to get a little report afterwards that tells us what needs to be hidden. We can't set up sorting orders, so we'll be finding out about those at the end. But what it does do is it gives us a nice little report here that says, listen, I created you an empty table stub with Power Query for metrics because it was a DAX-based table. I couldn't create that because we don't support that on Excel. These are all of the columns that need to be hidden here, and here's the sorting hierarchy that needs to be created. What I'm looking for right now.
Just a quick question, just on the timing for that.
Yeah.
What's the timing impact on say number of tables and entities and measures versus the size of the model in terms of the all the rows and everything that are in there? Like what are some of the biggest impacts on how long that might take for the import process, and is there like any kind of timeout limit?
It's no, there's no timeout limit on it. The big part of the entire process is really around the amount of data that needs to be loaded. It does need to load the data, and that's the kicker that you run into. So the more data you have, the longer it's going to take. And like I say, I mean, this is a pretty target case with this. I mean, I look at it and go, well, how long would it take you to rebuild the thing manually? And typically what I would recommend to someone is if they're going to be doing this on a model and they've never, they have no idea how long it is, what I would do is I would actually kick it off right before you go for your lunch break and walk away and come back and you'll have your report, right? I mean, otherwise, the reality is that it's going to take up a lot of time and it locks up your CPU in front of you. This is not a job that you're going to be doing every day, but at the same time, the comfort level of being able to just hit it and run it is going to be a lot easier. And I think you'd probably find that it's going to take a similar amount of time, maybe, let's say 50% longer than if you were going from Excel to Power BI, only because of the fact that we have to load every query individually rather than loading them as a group. So, but you can see here, the data model's been created. All the relationships are there. The table is over there. Now, I haven't been able to go and hide some things, but regardless, I can do that, and I've got a nice little report that tells me exactly what to deal with. All the queries are here. And what I want to show you is, let's take a look at, let's take a look at the chit details query. There's 348,000 rows of data in this. And the original query inside Power BI started here with the source step. So we inserted a blank table step that looks like this. We go and automatically code it. So basically, if it's a dollar column, we put, or a currency column, we put in a currency. If it's text, we put in the word missing. If it's a decimal, we just put in a 1 or something like that as well. And then we go into the source. And I mean, the source here is pulling from the Azure DB. It's running through this. It does this remove columns. Everything here is working. If it wasn't, you would actually see that these things here would be returning errors. But we run a safe output step at the end that attempts to do the change step. If it doesn't work, it falls back to the blank table. And that is exactly what's happening. Well, in this case here, we actually do a specific step for it. So it's nice for a little bit of future proofing here. This is also super important if you happen to use something like, I don't know, maybe you're getting data from web using table from examples inside Power BI. That's not supported in Excel. So we enumerate the contents of the table, put in the safety stubs because your Power Query is using a method that doesn't exist here. So it actually protects against those kind of things. Okay.
So it still allows basically for a partial load without actually failing the entire thing.
Exactly. So I want to do one more of these guys here. This is going to end up switching to a model because this one was actually quite successful. Just for disclosure on this, I want to show you what happens when we actually get around playing with a different kind of data model that isn't quite the same. So I'm going to go and create a blank workbook here. This time, I'm not even going to do a connect to. I'm just going to go import BI model to Excel. I'm going to pick up from Power BI right here. And we're going to pick up this guy here, Pbi Import. So this is a specific use case that I've created here, which has some components, a very lightweight file. It's got some components that don't exist in Excel. It's got some things like many-to-many relationships. It's got bidirectional filters. It actually also has some things that do exist in Excel that I can't create, which are hidden or inactive relationships, so multiple relationships per table potentially. And there's also a Power Query connector in this that doesn't work. And I accidentally, in this one, left that date table thing, just automating date tables, which is done with the DAX we can't import. Yep. So you can see that we've got a few things that have actually come back and said, look, there are some components here that we can't create for you. Now, let me just go back to Excel proper over here. And I just queries. So this week we'll come back over to Import Monkey. I'm going to go and I'm going to report on this. So these potentially can take some time because it still tries to load from the data or the data to the data model and does need to fail before it can actually use the, like it tries to execute the power query and the step needs to fail before it can actually go through and say, provide me the alternate output. But once it gets started, it's not too shabby, and you can see that the queries are coming in. The PQA TOC is a query that was generated using a table from example in web and therefore won't import correctly. It's nice that my queries and connections pane is not updating either. It will eventually. Trying to control that kind of stuff has been challenging. So, and here we go. So we can see that we're getting some messages about things not being created, and this is a report that comes back and says, look, I created you a couple of blank tables for your date tables here. So you can see they're here with one row loaded. So that's telling me that there was something that it created on the fly because these tables didn't exist. We got a whole bunch of columns that need to be hidden. We've got some sorting hierarchies that we couldn't create. So these are around the date table templates, obviously. Again, Dax tables using Dax formulas to do these kind of things. And then down the bottom, we actually have some import failures where the relationships were not created. I can't create a many-to-many. It's an inactive bidirectional relationship, couldn't be created because Excel doesn't support that kind of thing. I also can't create an inactive relationship. I can create them as active, but I can't create them as inactive. So I could create it as active in this case because it's the only relationship between the table, but we choose not to because I don't want to accidentally create something that doesn't work, or leads to the wrong answer in these particular cases. So if I go and look at the PQA TOC, this is a particular query, as I said, that uses the table from example. So this doesn't work. So if I take a look at it here, it's got a blank table. It only had one column called column 1. If I look at the source step, you can see, hey, this is giving me an error. So I can't create this particular table in the data model because this Power Query connector is not ready. The problem is if I'm storing measures or making relationships based on it, if that table doesn't load to the data model, I can't do that. So that's why we use the safe output step to say, let's at least create the column so we can do that other work, okay? If that makes sense. Meanwhile, of course, everything else has still got the same protection, right? Blank table on this one, but in this case, the source does work, comes through, so we return the real data. So those queries are working nicely, and then if I jump into the data model, you can see that as soon as we do this, we do actually have some issues in our measures table. It's giving us a little thing. So we always want to review this after you've done an import, because just because we can create the measure, recreate the measure, it doesn't mean it's not going to work. Power Pivot is incredibly forgiving on this. It'll let me create invalid measures where Power Query will not let me create invalid queries. So on this case here, I don't know why this is, but here we go. There are definitely a few that are actually causing me some problems here. So I do need to go back and actually take a look. This one here is trying to do something between these two. So if I look at cat 1, it's using a used relationship. This was the inactive relationship between these two tables. Because the relationship didn't work, it's erroring out. But if I come back to, escape from that. If I come back to diagram view and I go and make my, my individual relationships between, it was this guy here, and I'm just going to go and make this one here inactive the way it's supposed to be. And as I say, I mean, the thing that I think is important for our side here is that we are providing a checklist on the side to at least let you know what the heck actually needs to be done, so that you can actually just go through and figure out how to deal with it. Maybe you've got to rework it because it's not supported in Excel, or maybe it's something like this that is easy to do. I truly wish that Excel would let me do this kind of stuff. Would be nice, but I'm not holding out a lot of hope there.
But at least you get an itemized list of like everything that you kind of need to go do manually after it's already done, 99% of the work.
Exactly. And when you look at this now, my measures are working because the user relationship works again, so everything's back to health. So we're trying to give as much information as we can, because I mean, we know that this is one of the tricky bits around importing from Power BI back to Excel is the data model inside Power BI is newer, so there's things that aren't supported. The Power Query stack is newer, so or potentially has different pieces that are in preview. So it's got stuff. So we're trying to be as smart as we can around it. But we think that this is a big thing that, I mean, I know certainly this is something that I've wanted. This stub was actually deactivated inside the UI since day one that we released MonkeyTools. This was one of my #1 goals to get done. It's taken me a while, but we're super excited. This is now in the current build. If you're on MonkeyTools and you don't have this, if you just go to do an update, so you go to options and check for an update now, you'll actually get the update and it'll come through. Having said that, I think you would probably not be surprised. This is a pro feature, okay? It will work in a pro trial. But this one definitely is a pro feature that we've got out there for this as well. And just for sake of scope on this, a pro license for MonkeyTools is $99 a year. So we think it's still, if we can save you the effort of making one report or importing one Power BI model, we figure it's probably worth more than that of your time. But
Yep.
I wish I could work on commission, that would be great. But hey, so anyhow, so that's a quick run through some of there's still more, but that's a quick run through some of the highlights of what MonkeyTools actually has to offer. So
Yeah, I mean, with all of these, it's almost everything in here is like quite a few things can all be done manually, but it's over the course of like, oh yeah, this would take me 5 hours, this would take me 10 or even 2 minutes. But there are so many little pieces of time-saving elements, both for the free and then, like you said, for pro. It equates down to in a given year, or even within a year's time frame. Like if there's even something that can save collectively across a year, like an hour or two, like it alone, then almost immediately pays for itself, depending on what your time value is. Yeah.
And our philosophy is, try it before you buy it, right? I want to know that it's going to work for you and make sense, and give it a run through the features and whatnot. I don't want to sell anything to anybody that doesn't need it. That's not the way I do business. But at the same time, if it is something that you see that's valuable and can actually help support what you're doing and make your life easier, that's the sort of the philosophy of the tool that we're actually working with here. So, it's I say we're really proud of it. I'm super happy with it. It's actually been a tool that I've been developing for, oh boy, the better part of 10 years, honestly. We finally got it out to market, not that long ago, but it's amazing. And I'm actually, even looking at the stuff that I've written here, I'm blown away when I look back at, how far we've come in a year or 2 years on what we have, and I know that's not very humble, but at the same time, this makes my life so much easier. And that's the reason why I'm super proud of it is, we do a lot of work on this. We use this to build our stuff and do our work and whatnot. And every time I see somebody doing something the hard way, I think there's got to be a better way. And I'll bet you we can actually, sort of do something there to help people out. So if you're interested, I'd say check it out. If you're not, it's not your jam, then that's all cool too. That's all good. Try the trial, see if it works for you. And if it doesn't, don't.
I like Marshall's comment is for him it's going to save a lot of time, and he thinks it's one of the most legendary tools he's seen. It's a great description of it.
Oh, cool. Thanks. I appreciate that. That's awesome. That's what we love to hear. So the last thing I would say is, if people are using it, one of those things, if you ever find a bug or you want to make a feature suggestion, we actually have a little thing right here to come back and shoot those right to us. So it's a tool that we're working on constantly, and we are serious about tracking down bugs and things. So if people find them, let us know. And if there's other things you like and go, wow, it would be really cool if it did this, tell me. I'm not going to guarantee that we'll build it for you right away, but at the same time, if it's something that inspires us, I got about 4 things that are currently in active development right now, and some of them were based on, hey, that's shiny, and other things are like, wow, this would be really impactful. So, those are the things that we're thinking of. So, it's lots of fun to play around with here. So.
Yeah, even today you just had that new feature that that I'm appreciative that you showed on there, just the ability to import back in, which is a pro feature, but also one of those like that nothing else does that. It's been a one-way street, historically. So
well, and that's why we get to mark that one as a pro, because nothing else does that, right? There's lots of this is the thing that I recognize out there. There's a lot of tools that do a lot of work, and we all do things slightly differently and whatnot. We're targeting at the person that works inside Excel to do these kind of things, and that's where our primary target market is. Although, again, particularly with the sleuthing things, I want people to be aware of that. If you do get a Power BI model and you're trying to figure out what's going on with it, you do have the ability to actually pull some of these things back. The query sleuth works against the Power BI model. The Dax Luth works against it. All of the model sleuth or most of the model sleuth reports work against it. And then you can import back into Excel if you want to play around. So, so those are the key things that are out there. I wish I could create queries in Power BI. I can't. I can only create queries in Excel, so that's why we do a lot of that work there. But yeah,
there was one just quick question just about connecting to Power BI that we can ask before we wrap up. But they mentioned that analyze in Excel is MDX, and he had asked a previous question as well if this was entirely based with MDX coding, or does it use any other languages?
I don't use any MDX coding at all. I'm Dax, I'm M, I'm VB.net, I'm a lot of different things, but I don't actually use any MDX at all. MDX being the language of pivot tables and whatnot. Yeah. So now when you talk about analyze in Excel, there's an interesting component to that, and I will just say that we are looking at that at the moment as to some things that we can do there for some cool pieces, but I'm not at a point where I'm ready to release it. But I'll just sort of throw out a teaser that we've got some cool ideas around playing with the output from Analyze in Excel and also the output from the Power Pivot Cube to do some things that maybe haven't been seen yet. And if you're interested in seeing that, you may want to check out the Vancouver Power BI user group, the Excel talk that's going to be happening in July. My goal is to actually show some cool use of some of these things that could potentially be targeted against Analyze in Excel to build charts against the data model that can't be done via pivot charts. And that's as much as I'll give you on that right now. But that's sort of the philosophy of where I'm going, or the thought that I've got for that particular user group presentation is, doing the unpivotable charts for things that, maybe you can't create normally, like, waterfall charts can't be done against a pivot source, things like that. So,
one final question from Marshall, just about
Sure.
when the second edition of M for Data Monkey might be coming out.
Oh, geez, yeah, I tell you. So it is actively being written at the moment. You aren't seeing a lot from me on blog posts and whatever else, and that's because I'm putting my time into writing that book. I'm going to be really excited to see that done. The manuscript, our end date, drop dead end date on the manuscript completion is June 30th. That is what we need in order to make this thing go live by November 1st, which is the currently promised date on Amazon. We will get there. This book, it has to be done. It's got to get off my plate. So I promise it is coming. So if you happen to be a member of our Power Query Academy at Skillwave, you will see a copy earlier than the Amazon date. But yeah, it's coming. It's coming. It'll be this year. So
perfect.
Knew that question was going to come up at some point. So
I'm glad they asked it. Yeah, because I'm sure, myself included, anytime I can consume a Power Query book, I'm always happy to. Like, yeah, I think yours was one of the first I read. It was also one of the first out, I think, if not even the one out back in the day.
I know. And I'll tell you, it's a really, really hard technology to write for because it's changing so fast, and it's one of those things where you sit there and there's every day there's another thing that you go, should we hold it for that? No, we got to get it out. Should we hold it for that? No, we got to get it out. And couple that up with the fact that you got another job and that you got to do, and writing takes a long amount of time, right? Yeah, I know it's a tough one, but it's coming out. It is definitely a priority, and as I say, it is an active development. I know Miguel and I met and we're reviewing a pretty key chapter last week. My calendar is virtually 100% dedicated to writing this month. I'm trying to put off virtually everything else I can so that we can get it done and out the door. So it's coming, I promise. It's our number one priority to get it out the door. So
perfect. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's why I've got a developer working on this stuff so that I can write the book. Right? So
exactly. But otherwise, I want to appreciate you for coming on. Even today, I learned quite a few things about MonkeyTools. There's so many features that are available on that, and I think both myself and anybody else really uses Excel, even at the free version level. Tons of time-saving options, and at the end of the day, that's what the goal of any tool is, really just saving time to allow you to actually do more important things with your job, and actually getting the creative juices flowing with better uses of your time.
Yeah, here I should leave you with that, because this will at least tell people where to find the MonkeyTools link if you're interested in looking at it, and as well if you want to connect with me, there's a few different options there for things as well. So, but yeah, thanks for having me, Reed. I mean, it's always fun to have a conversation and show some of this kind of stuff, and appreciate the questions that came in and whatnot. And yeah, I just hope that people will find this useful and give it a try, and hopefully it saves them some time so they can be lazy, efficient like me, right? That's the whole goal. So
absolutely.
There you go.
Otherwise, everybody, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you as well this Friday on my other live stream. And Ken, I'm happy to have you back on sometime. I'm sure, and there will be other things that this will either be developing, or at any point. I just love talking Power Query, so that's also a topic that I really just enjoy water cooling about.
No, absolutely. Let's do it for sure. And let me build some more features, but then let's do both. Let's talk about new features and Power Query. Why not? That's what
I like
it's
it.
all about, right?
Like column A, column B. Yep. Cool.
There you go. Perfect.
All right.
Awesome.
Then,
thanks, Reed. Appreciate it.
Yeah, everybody else, have a good rest of your day, and we'll see each other soon.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for watching. please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.